The Last Man on Earth. Even as I wheeze in the acrid air and scratch at the weeping sores on my skin, I can't help but smile at the irony of my situation. For centuries, people have been wondering what it would be like to experience the fate I find myself facing. Being the final survivor on a dead world, wandering through the ruins of the apocalypse. I've had plenty of time to look through the digital records. Countless hours spent poring over ebooks, printed novels, short stories in decomposing magazines. So far, I've not found any that got it quite right. Many of the authors did a fine job, capturing the despair and the loneliness. Some even spared a few thoughts for the abject boredom that sets in when you've exhausted all the diversions that an empty world can afford. But none seem to have considered the helpless frustration, the feeling of taking one step closer to oblivion every time I toss away another empty can of food or bottle of water into the trash heap behind the burned out, ruined mansion that serves as my transient home. I've abandoned any hopes of ever laying eyes on another living soul. Everywhere I've travelled, I've found nothing but devastation. When the bombs fell and ravaged the earth, it does seem that I was the only survivor. My post was an isolated listening station in a remote corner of Scandinavia, an underfunded and undermanned military relic that had somehow been overlooked for decommissioning. 3 more staff had been scheduled to arrive a week after the war began. A few days difference, and I wouldn't be alone. At first, I saw myself as blessed. As the flames and the radiation engulfed the earth, I sealed myself in and waited it out. 12 meters of steel, concrete and earth protected me from the titanic blasts, and my isolated location meant that the facility was spared the worst of the devastation. It was months before the Geiger counters on the surface showed that the radiation had faded sufficiently for me to venture outside. I emerged into a scarred world. Those trees which hadn't been ripped apart by the explosions were scorched bare. The air was choked with thick, oily smoke, and the stench of burning plastic assaulted my senses. I didn't spend long outside those first few months. Instead, I searched feverishly for a signal from another survivor. Some of the communication equipment within the facility still worked, and I would sit for hours with my eyes glued to the monitors, hunting for a sign of someone reaching out. I set up an SOS signal myself, detailing my location and status. After a week of silence, I braved the outside world again to check the external transmitter. It was crippled beyond any hope of repair, ripped apart by the initial blasts. My pleas for help had gone nowhere. I'd been crying out for salvation, and the only ears to hear it had been my own. A month later, I was forced to abandon the facility when the supplies ran out. That was 6 years ago. I've wandered through countless ruined towns and cities since then, scavenging food and supplies, never laying eyes on another survivor. Every time I've found a facility that might once have enabled me to get a signal out, the power is dead. The equipment too heavily damaged to be salvageable. Every satellite link is gone. The E-beacons are destroyed. Even the antiquated radio towers, preserved for posterity, are melted to useless slag. I've tried lighting signal fires, infernos that stretch across what used to be bustling metropolises. How would anyone pick them out of the smouldering ruins? All I can do is look up at the stars and marvel at their majesty. I like to watch the ships too, passing by high overhead. The trade routes between the Martian colonies and the orbital stations around Venus are still as busy as ever. Using a telescope I scavenged, I think I even picked out a cruise liner, trawling towards Europa. I thought about the people on board. Wondered whether they still talked about the Earth's destruction, after all this time. We guessed for centuries, quite rightly, as it turned out, that the end of the world would come at our own hands. That someone would finally push the button, drop the bomb, say the deplorable word. I don't doubt that they looked for other survivors. Ships in orbit scanning the surface. Maybe even a few brave souls landing and sending out search parties. But without any means to send a signal, and hidden beneath the surface in my bunker, there was no chance of them finding one man, with a whole planet to be lost on. I should have had the good sense to leave years ago as tensions mounted between the factions, and more sober voices were drowned out by the bloodthirsty. But even as my food begins to run out, and my water supplies run dry, it still brings me some comfort to know that the stars aren't empty. I'll have to move on tomorrow. I have nothing left to live for, and I'm sure that the radiation is slowly killing me. But the will to defy death is hardwired into us. As long as I have the strength to keep moving, I will continue, wandering through the ruins, eking out another day from what's left among the ashes. Maybe it's worth carrying on for just one more night, gazing up at the stars. The corroded steel door hangs off its hinges, revealing a dark shaft leading down. Before the war, it would have been almost undetectable, concealed within a thick, all but impenetrable pine forest. But the fires have left the trees as nothing more than a few blackened stumps, and the blanket of ash that must have fallen has long since been whipped away by the relentless, howling winds. I'm sure that this is a Western Alliance facility, the same side that I was on, in a war that neither side survived, let alone won. The proud lion's head emblem is still stenciled onto the inner side of the door, but only a faint imprint remains after years of exposure to the elements. I've come across maybe a dozen military installations over the years, all abandoned or home to no one but the dead. Soldiers who stayed at their posts, even as their bodies were ravaged by radiation. One was still clutching a rifle, collapsed behind a pile of sandbags just inside the entrance. The darkness within is forbidding, but I remind myself that if there is anyone, or anything in there, it can't be any more dangerous than lingering outside. Besides, military outposts have proven to be one of my best sources of supplies. These installations were designed to keep the soldiers inside alive, to continue launching doomsday weapons across the planet for weeks, while countless billions on the surface were annihilated. As it turns out, we underestimated our own capacity for destruction. Mine is the only bunker I've found so far that wasn't breached, either ripped open by the blasts, or tainted with radiation that killed those within. As I descend the metal staircase, I see a glow of light ahead. The bulbs directly above me have been shattered, but as I reach the bottom, the corridor ahead is bathed in a sickly, flickering light. A few intact fluorescent tubes illuminate the bare concrete walls. This facility must run off a renewable power supply. Not nuclear. A fission reactor, even an automated one, would have shut down by now. Maybe geothermal? I seem to remember that this region of Italy used to be known for thermal springs. In any case, there might be an opportunity to reliably recharge some of my gear. I've been able to scavenge a few portable solar panels, but those don't work too well on a planet in the grip of a nuclear winter. I begin to explore, uncovering the familiar detritus that's left behind when people are preparing for war. An infirmary full of expired medication and trauma kits, half a dozen empty bunks in a barracks area. I can't help but snort in derision at the state of the armory. The soldiers who manned this facility took their rifles with them when they left, presumably hoping to find another shelter that hadn't been breached. By the time they would have been forced to do that, there was no one left alive on the surface, much less anyone who would be interested in continuing the idiotic, futile conflict that led to the cataclysm. The mess area yields just a few cans of food and a tank of stagnant, but hopefully still drinkable, water. Enough for a few days at most. Still, better than nothing. The basic layout is one I'm familiar with. The Western Alliance liked uniformity in their facilities, as well as their soldiers, but this one is bigger than I expected. Another long corridor, featureless aside from a red line traced on the floor, ends in a heavy blast door. Once, it would have been magnetically sealed, but that system, along with several others in the facility, is no longer working. I managed to drive a screwdriver into the gap and lever it open enough to brace my shoulder against the door. I force it open, over the grind and screech of metal. Inch by inch, it moves. Panting with exertion, I wipe the sweat from my eyes and look through the doorway. A monument to destruction stands in front of me. A missile, 80 feet high, still secured in its silo. I'm no expert, but even I recognise this as a high-yield warhead, Ares class I think, capable of levelling a metropolis and creating a radius of destruction hundreds of miles wide. Red and green LEDs blink on its surface. The gentle, soothing hum of electronics fills the air. It's still active. And it's armed. I move to leap back and slam the blast door shut before I catch myself, realising what a pointless move that would be. The bomb in front of me could flatten a mountain. A few inches of steel are hardly likely to do me much good. Besides, if it hasn't gone off in 6 years, it probably isn't going to now. All the same, I'm shaking when I enter the control room. It takes me 5 minutes to work up the courage to activate the computers. I half expected to find someone in there. A dead soldier, maybe, executed for refusing to follow orders and launch the missile. Murdered by a superior officer for the crime of retaining a shred of sanity. But the room is as empty as the rest of the facility, and in much better condition. Clearly, whoever designed the base was more concerned with making sure that this weapon stayed functional than they were with keeping its caretakers alive. My own service history never included a posting to a launch facility, but I'm familiar enough with the systems to find my way around the computer. I was right. The missile is armed, and the order to fire has been given. The computer reports that the warhead is working perfectly. Something else has stalled its launch. After a few more minutes of searching, I find the issue. The silo doors have jammed. The huge metal iris that would have given the missile a clear path up into the stratosphere has failed to open, and the weapon won't fire until it does. I take a look through the glass window in the control room at the slumbering warhead. It's an astonishing work of engineering. Unthinkable power. It's probably the most sophisticated piece of functioning technology left on the entire planet. And all it can do now is blast another crater, scatter the ashes of the world a little bit wider. I can't disarm it. Once the fire command is received, there's no going back. I gather my things and leave. There's the ruins of a village, a few miles hike from the silo. Civilian structures seldom have anything left worth scavenging, but there's always the chance that a basement has survived intact with a few useful items. I find a half-collapsed farmhouse in what looks like it might have been an olive grove, the dead trees set out in long, orderly lines. Inside, there's the usual wreckage, but a door in the kitchen leads down into a cellar. It's been barricaded, but not very well. Nevertheless, it does take me a few minutes to force it open. I can feel that I'm getting weaker. Whether it's radiation sickness or starvation, I can't be sure, but I know that the day is coming when I'll lie down to sleep, and I won't be able to pick myself back up, whether it's in a few months or mere weeks. I force the thought out of my head and descend the stairs. The beam from my flashlight cuts through the darkness, revealing one more story with a tragic ending. A pair of desiccated bodies lie on a camping bed, a man and a woman from what I can tell. It looks like they died in each other's arms. I feel like a voyeur staring at them, but I'm not being macabre. I'm thinking about the last time I touched another human being, felt the warmth of their skin against mine. When I die, I will be alone. Of all the ways to leave this world, these two didn't do too badly. At least they were together at the end. I pull the blanket up to cover them. I don't have the strength to dig graves, and this house, where they lived and died together, seems like a better resting place than a hole in the scorched earth outside. The cellar seems to have been a workshop for the couple. There's a pair of easy chairs, a neatly organised workbench, an easel beneath the window, paintings on the walls. It looks like it was somewhere that meant something to them. I do still need to explore the room though. There's no obvious food or water, but the shelves are lined with boxes. You'd be surprised how many people have a hoarding streak that manifests as a basement full of canned ravioli and instant ramen. I don't have any luck finding food, but one box catches my attention. One of the former inhabitants of this house seems to have been a keen amateur astronomer. I find star charts, surface maps of the planets with the cities and colonies picked out, lunar calendars, spotting scopes. In the corner of the room, a sheet covers a bulky object. I pull it aside, throwing up a cloud of dust. As the air clears, I point my torch at the item. It's an orrery, a mechanical model that tracks the movements of the planets. And it's a work of art, rendered in brass and dark, aged wood. The planets are picked out in polished glass. A blue-green marble for Earth, Venus a golden yellow, Mars a deep, rich red. A handle in the base operates the gears that will set the planet spinning, tracing arcs around the sun. I'm transfixed as I look at it. It's a work fueled by passion and curiosity, built by someone who is awed by the universe. The orrery includes a mechanical calendar, a needle tracking the days, months, and years as the planets move through their orbits. It looks like the owner kept the model up to date. The needle is set to the day before the bombs fell. I turn the handle, moving the planets through time and space, dragging them into the present. Years pass in minutes as the gears turn, Earth, Mars, and Venus growing ever closer until they are aligned. Earth sitting directly between the two other worlds. I look down at the date on the calendar. 5 weeks ago. I keep moving the handle, and the planets drift away from each other until the needle settles on today's date. The planets are no longer perfectly aligned. The distance between them has grown, but Earth is still between the two. The journey from Mars to Venus will take longer, but Earth will still be a landmark in the distance along the way. A few weeks ago, I was closer to other people than I had been in over half a decade, and I didn't even realise. The tens of millions of miles between me and anyone else had shrunk, but still just as impassable. Without communication equipment, the ships that pass by remain unreachable. Even if I carved out an SOS across a continent, it could never be seen across such a distance. The last thing observers might have seen coming from Earth would have been the war itself. The apocalyptic explosions that destroyed our world would have been visible to the naked eye from a vessel even out past high orbit. And there's one missile left. I can feel my heartbeat quickening, my mind exploding with possibilities. I must manage my hopes, control my optimism. I don't even know if the plan forming in my mind is possible, much less whether it will work, even if I can put it into effect. But I can't help it. Before I can stop myself, I'm laughing and sobbing in the same breath. I stagger back up the stairs, out into the harsh air. The best I can manage is a shambling run, as I head back down the hill, towards the silo. I can't change the missile's target. I've consulted every manual, explored every system, but just as the missile can't be disabled, I can't change its course. It's set to launch itself out of the Earth's atmosphere and crash back down on a tiny island in the Yellow Sea. God knows why. Maybe the generals in charge knew there was something strategically significant there. Or maybe that spot was chosen at random. An excuse to justify the billions the missile must have cost. Another senseless decision, in a long line of them that led to global catastrophe. But whatever the reason, that's where it's set to fall. The target can't be changed. Once the missile launches, its manoeuvring thrusters will come online, moving it into orbit before it descends back to the Earth. If it strikes the surface, unless someone is watching the planet at that precise moment, the chance of it being seen is vanishingly small. I need it to fly as far from the Earth as possible before it detonates. A blinding flash of light and heat and energy into the cold void of space. Tampering with the warhead is the most nerve-wracking experience of my life. I feel a terror that isn't even matched by the days I spent in the facility where I was originally stationed as the bombs fell outside. At least then, my survival was in the hands of fate. Now, my life is in my own hands. As I remove the outer casing and sever the thrusters from their control systems, I hold my breath every time I squeeze the wire clippers. If I've succeeded in disabling the thrusters, the warhead should remain on its trajectory upwards and away from the world, detonating when its countdown expires. Finally, with my work complete, I replace the outer panel, easing it back into place with sweat-soaked hands. The irony that my best hope of survival rests on the same thing that could destroy me in an instant doesn't escape me. It takes me 2 days to clear the launch hatch. In my weakened state, I struggle to drag aside the fallen trees and rubble that have blocked the iris. I'm coughing more and more now, struggling to breathe, and the meagre supply of food has run out. If my plan fails, I know I won't have the strength to make it to wherever I can find more supplies, assuming there is even any such place left. On trembling legs, I stumble back down into the silo and make my way to the control room. I've isolated the control for the doors. When they open, the missile should launch. My finger lingers over the keyboard. When I press this button, any number of possibilities could occur. The doors could open, but the missile might remain inert. The doors could remain closed, but the warhead could fire all the same. The missile could fire, detonate, and be seen by no one. But the only real difference, either way, is whether I die here, alone in this place, or not. And if my life is about to end, I don't want those to be my final thoughts. Instead, I think about the couple in the house where I found the orrery. I think about two people who knew the end was coming and chose to face it together in a place surrounded by beautiful things they'd made. I press the button. For a moment, there is only the hum of the computer, and then the facility roars into life. A klaxon sounds, and the room is plunged into red light. Over the din, I hear the silo doors grinding open. Lights flash on the console in front of me, and a blast shield slams down, cutting off my view of the missile. I am in no doubt that it is launching, though. The whole structure is shaking, and I can feel heat coming through the steel barrier in front of me. I clasp my hands over my ears as the sound reaches a deafening crescendo. Disoriented and shaken, I stumble out of the control room, back through the facility, clanging up the stairs towards the exit. I look up. The flaming tail of the missile is still clear, a bright orange streak across the sky. Even at this distance, it's impossible to miss. I watch it grow smaller, checking my watch as the trail begins to fade. 5 seconds to go. I scan the sky for the tiny moving stars that are all I can see of the ships from here. 4 seconds. I can't pick any out, but they aren't always easy to spot with the naked eye. 3 seconds. What if the ships are automated? Will their sensors report the blip of an explosion? And if they do, Would that report ever find its way in front of a human who could understand its significance? 2 seconds. I see a star that seems to move. 1 second. I don't want to die. The sky turns blinding white, brighter than a midday equatorial sun. Even when I screw my eyes shut, I can still see the glare. I force my eyes open again, spots swimming in front of my vision. I can see the tail end of the explosion, an orange halo that expands, growing fainter and fainter, and then finally disappears, leaving nothing but darkness. It's quiet. The only sound is the relentless wind. I stare up at the sky, my vision still blurry. I can't find the moving star I spotted before. I lost my bearings when I shut my eyes. Then I see it again, slowly and silently tracing a path across the blackness. It's moving at the same sedate pace as before, but it's heading back the way it came. Then there's another, a second speck of light forging a path towards the site of the explosion. Then I see a third, and a fourth, and then the sky is alive with a dozen tiny moving lights, all heading to the same place, all chasing the blinding flash that has come from a lifeless planet. As the adrenaline fades, my legs buckle and I slump to the ground. I lie there, a smile forming across my cracked lips, my back to a dead world, looking up into a sky filling with tiny, wandering stars. Thank you very much for listening to The Last Man on Earth. I hope you enjoyed this story, and if you did, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like button, leave a comment, and even consider subscribing. I can't make any promises about how often I'll be updating this channel, but I'm not planning on abandoning it, so if you'd like to hear more, I'd love to know. Thanks again, and bye for now.